It's hard to believe that System Shock 2 is close to being 26 years old. The game released at a point in the industry where game design philosophy was just coming to terms with how to properly exploit 3D spaces after being locked to a 2D plane for decades. Developer Looking Glass Studios, teaming up here with Irrational Games, had already been at the forefront of this with such titles as the original System Shock, Terra Nova Strikeforce Centauri, and Thief the Dark Project. But System Shock 2 still managed to feel like a tremendous step up from those previous efforts. Not only did it rely more heavily on scripted events to provoke certain reactions from the player, but it leaned even harder into its RPG roots to create this incredible hybrid of FPS and RPG design that would go on to be perfected by JSX just a year later. The game is still damn good, but obviously, game design has moved on in the quarter century since its original release. Enter Nightdive Studios with its latest remaster effort, the aptly titled System Shock 2 25th Anniversary Remaster. While this is close enough to the original's release date to nearly be a 26th anniversary, I can let the elongated name slide because Nightdive has always done quality work. Rarely is there a remastering effort from the studio that misses the mark, and while no one is perfect, Nightdive is very dedicated to resurrecting classic titles and giving them a second shot at life. In fact, the company started off by acquiring the rights to digitally distribute the original version of System Shock 2, which is still available on Steam and GOG to this day. So why would you need a remaster if the original is perfectly playable? Well, for one, this new version does enough to update the visuals so the game won't look bizarre in 4K. While I cherish classic graphics, you can't always slap widescreen on a retro game and get a consistent look. Second, if you're a console player, you've never had the chance to play System Shock 2 as it was never ported to any other platforms barring Mac and Linux. This remaster rectifies that injustice, allowing console players to fiddle with gamepad controls or plug in a mouse and keyboard and recreate the PC experience on their platform of choice. Lastly, there are enough quality of life improvements here to smooth over some of the rougher edges of the original, making it the preferred way to re-experience the horrors of the Von Braun and the UNN Rickenbacker. If you need further convincing, let me break down some of what I liked about this remaster, some points I think could still be improved, and elements that I think the original game even missed on. Now, this won't be a traditional review where I summarize the plot or talk about the specifics of System Shock 2's design. I'll give some thoughts at the end, but seeing as how the series is hardly overlooked and hasn't been relegated to the history books over time, there's no need for me to detail the game. You'll likely already know if you like System Shock 2 enough to want a remaster of it. That said, console players will probably be curious as the game was never playable there, but I'm not one to take the first-person shooter controls on a gamepad. In that configuration, I feel System Shock 2 is maybe a bit too cumbersome to feel enjoyable, not to mention navigating the menu is painful. The obvious big changes here are with regards to the visuals. For the most part, the art style of the original System Shock 2 has not been tweaked at all. The Von Braun still has that steely cold look to it, and the environmental textures don't make dramatic tweaks to tiling or design. If you never played the original, you'd probably not even realize there were any changes. In a way, this remaster reminds me of the work Rezo did for Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the 3DS. Nightdive has taken the original concept art sketches and translated those to 3D with the upgraded power of newer hardware. The job is so good that you don't even notice it without a direct side-by-side comparison, meaning it feels very natural. The spot where you will notice some changes are with the weapon models. Again, the guns don't look radically different, but there are more frames of animation, and weapons that should have been two-handed in the original now display your character's hands. The M16 in particular looks quite good, and being able to toggle ammo types without fiddling in the inventory is a nice touch. There are some weird bugs where when reloading, your character won't move their hands, or when you die, the gun doesn't drop to the floor, but I also played an earlier build than the final release. The other tweaks come in the form of updated character and item models. Enemies look more complex than before, though again, they stick very closely to the original art direction. Human NPCs animate a lot better, but then their lifeless faces actually come off as comical more than horrified, which I do think can be tweaked a bit more. Even things like the chemical containers are now more rounded instead of hexagonal, which applies to items such as furniture and plant fixtures as well. System Shock 2 25th Anniversary Remaster still looks like a game of its era, but it's definitely easier on the eyes from a modern sense. To put this into perspective, I recently did a replay of Deus Ex with some texture mods and UI scaling, and it doesn't look as good as this remaster. That game is newer as well, if only by a year. The most appreciable difference has to be with regards to audio quality. Everything is delivered in an uncompressed form now, so those audio logs, gun firing sounds, and monster screeches are richer than ever. The cutscenes have also been recreated, making them look much sharper at higher resolutions. That's really the power of modern hardware, being able to play things at max fidelity with no compromises. This doesn't bloat the file size either, as the Steam download is just under 4 gigs. That's certainly much larger than the OG game, but it pales in comparison to modern titles that have eclipsed 100 gigs. If you were looking to hear that the game is suddenly completely overhauled and plays just like a game released yesterday, then I'm sorry to report that that isn't the case. There are quality of life tweaks here, such as the aforementioned ammo swapping during play, as well as proper first-person aiming controls, better inventory management, more detailed UI, and autosaves on each map transition, but that's about the extent of things. At times with Nightdive releases, the improvements are so expected that while you can appreciate their inclusion, they don't really elicit much excitement. System Shock 2 was largely successful in its default state, so there's not much Nightdive could have done to greatly improve anything aside from tweaking the actual level design. Where this remaster gets a leg up, however, is with regards to multiplayer. Now, I wasn't able to test this feature out before launch, but System Shock 2 25th Anniversary Remaster has a fully integrated co-op mode. While it was possible to sort of hack one into the OG version, and there have been mods available that allow the feature, this is the first official release of such a mode. It comes with cross-platform support, meaning you can bring your friends from Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation along with you if you're on PC. I wish I could tell you the finer details of that mode, but I imagine that one player dying simply sets them back to a regenerator while the other players continue on. It definitely sounds like a unique way to experience System Shock 2, which was always isolating by design. As for my thoughts on the campaign after all this time and multiple previous playthroughs, I think System Shock 2 has mostly held up well. The opening training sequence is pretty poorly designed with little explanation given to the player and a mostly dry narration going on. Once you get onto the Von Braun proper, the game presents a starkly different atmosphere from the OG game, going more for horror and pitting you against enemies that can kill you in a couple of hits. It's a great introduction to how System Shock 2 plays out, allowing you to wander in any direction while figuring things out for yourself. It's really only once you get towards the end game that things fall apart. I'm not the biggest fan of hunting for black eggs on the Rickenbacker, and while I do like the throwback to Citadel Station that Shodan makes players trek through, those ending segments are linear to a fault. The best thing about System Shock 2, and immersive sims in general, is that player choice is at the forefront of design. When you're in the closing hours here, that kind of goes out the window, and System Shock 2 nearly becomes a full-on shooter. The penultimate area, the body of the many, feels like the worst bits of Half-Life Zen thrown together because the developers ran out of time. That also goes double for the final boss, which is mostly pointless and hardly a battle. Still, it's hard to be disappointed with System Shock 2. When BioShock released in 2007, I was excited as I thought Irrational Games was making a continuation of System Shock's in-depth systems and gameplay ideas. Instead, it was a watered-down take on immersive sims that presented an incredible atmosphere, but had pretty much nothing going on with its gameplay. Even at its worst bits, System Shock 2 still has player expression with its guns and psionic powers, a thing I didn't even touch on because you can completely ignore them if you want. Maybe the ending could be better, but it's still more interesting to me than facing off against a hyper-powered Fontaine who just runs at you. Summing this all up, I wouldn't say that System Shock 2 25th Anniversary Remaster is on the same level as other Nightdive releases. There simply was no way that the studio could do much, as the original game didn't really need an overhaul. Maybe it would have been neat to see our refined finale, but the original development team at Looking Glass Studios and Irrational Games got most of their ideas into the final product. There wasn't much of the way in cut content. The benefits here are for console players, who will now have the chance to actually experience this game without needing a PC. For that alone, this remaster is worth it. If you're on PC though, paying $30 to get this version is maybe a bit steep. I do believe this remaster is the definitive version of System Shock 2, but it isn't such a stark upgrade that you'd be missing out going for the original. If you've been dying to play multiplayer, however, then you've got a fully integrated co-op mode available with no tweaking needed. I know that I'll probably drag one of my friends along with me in the future, as I love taking him through classic games that he missed. So, all in all, this is another bit of solid work from Nightdive that is not entirely essential. If you've never played System Shock 2, then you finally got the best possible way to experience the game without some late 90s jank. That's certainly cause for celebration.